Good evening, everybody. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a good Wednesday.
We'll get started in just a little bit. We're going to wait for the number of attendees to level off a little bit. So let's just give everybody some time to get settled. Still have a steady stream of people joining us. So let's give everybody just one more minute and we will get started to honor your time. Okay, my friends, let's go ahead and get started to honor your time. Welcome everybody to tonight's webinar Wednesday presentation, which is on the UC Personal Insight Questions. This is hosted by CUSD-Futureology and our expert presenter tonight, whom you will meet in just a little bit. So let's go ahead and move forward. Just to start out with, so that everybody knows, who we are. My name is Bea and I'm part of CUSD-Futureology. I'm joined here by my colleagues, Monica and Kristen, and we are the district's free college and career counseling program. So we provide various events like these, workshops, one-on-one counseling appointments, and other supports for your students throughout the district. We are all credentialed school counselors with a specialization in college and career. We are all experienced college admissions readers. We're data driven, and we are here to support you and your students as they navigate their college and career journey. And I know that we have a lot of students in here as well, so we're here to support all of you. Please feel free to check out our website for additional resources. We will be continuing to provide events like these to make sure that you're fully informed and that you have all of the tools that you need in order to succeed in this journey throughout high school. So thank you so much for being with us. We're really excited to have you here. A few housekeeping items before we move forward. This is a webinar format, so your cameras are turned off, your mics are turned off. We can't hear or see you. Please use the Q&A function to ask your questions, and just be mindful that as Robyn moves along tonight in the presentation, that you'll find that she will possibly answer some of the questions you have. So feel free to hang on to those questions because they might be answered. We will hang back at the end to answer your remaining questions as best as we can. But if you do have questions, use that Q&A function. This webinar will be recorded, so if you have to excuse yourself early, no problem. We will have this posted on our YouTube channel as we always do within 24 to 48 hours for you to review in your own time at your own pace. With that being said, let's go ahead and move forward, and I'd love to introduce you to our expert presenter, Robyn Morton. Robyn is the Assistant Director of High School Services at University of California, Santa Barbara, and she will be presenting tonight on the UC Personal Insight Questions. She has a wealth of information in this area and has a lot of really awesome resources and information to share with you. We are so honored to have you join us, Robyn. We can't wait to hear what you have to share with us. And with that, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right, well, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am very excited to get to speak with you all about the UC Personal Insight Questions. Now, as Bea mentioned, my name is Robyn. I really am thrilled that you're joining. And throughout the presentation, as she also mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to add those to the Q&A box, not the chat box. Now we're talking about the chat box, and right now I'm actually going to include a link to register for this on my end. If you don't mind, at some point tonight, anytime before 9 p.m., if you wouldn't mind clicking on that, filling out your information, just so that I am, one, aware of how many people attended this presentation, who attended this presentation, but two, This will also add you not to our general mailing list, but you'll see when you fill out that registration, it says, oh, I am a prospective student applying for 2022 admission or whatever it may be. We'll send you important information about the application. I promise I will not spam your inbox. This is just really helpful for us to know who we've reached out to and what information we're sharing with who. With that being said, let's get back to the presentation. So it's obvious that I work for UC Santa Barbara and I read applications for UC Santa Barbara, but the information that I'm sharing with you all is really going to be based on the UC system, the UC application, the UC personal insight questions in general. So we're jumping right in. The UC system is made up of 9 undergraduate campuses. We offer both undergraduate and graduate education in the UC system. We are a public system in the state of California. All the UC campuses share the same minimum eligibility requirements, the same application, which is the UC application. Now, this is the only application that we use. The UC application is available only online. You can see the link for you there on the screen, and it's available via desktop or mobile view, so whatever you prefer. Now, the UC application is actually open right now. It opened August 1st, but students cannot submit until November 1st with a deadline of November 30th. It does not matter when in the month of November you submit your application. We don't read applications in the order that we receive them, so just make sure you get it in by that November 30th deadline. For general admission, the UC does not conduct interviews, nor do we have early action or early decision, so students are only turning that application in November. Now, because all the UCs share the same application, every campus you choose to apply to will receive the same copy of your application. This means you should not be campus specific anywhere when you're filling this application out because the same information is going to all of us. And even though we're receiving the same information, we are going to review your application individually from each other. Trust me when I say the UCs do not collaborate on admissions decisions. Next slide, please. So what are we really looking at when we're reviewing your application? There are 13 factors for admission. As you can see here on the screen, these were actually created by faculty members from all 9 UC campuses. And these are the factors that we, as in the UC campuses, can use when admitting students. Many of these are what you expect: completing A through G coursework, honors or advanced coursework you might have taken, but also realize there are factors like the quality of your senior year coursework, special talents, leadership, and accomplishment in light of life experiences. Context really matters in both your academic and your non-academic review, also known as your personal review. Read through these. This is public information. You can find them online by just typing in your search engine UC 13 factors for review, or UC how applications are reviewed, something like that. I promise these factors will pop up. Become familiar with them. And most importantly, think about these factors when you're filling out your UC application. Now, as I mentioned, there are 7 sections in the application to fill out, but today we're really going to be focusing on the personal insight questions. Next slide, please. Now, what is the purpose of the personal insight questions? It's really threefold. Number 1, it offers us clarity. It gives us a richer perspective into your life, your experiences, and your accomplishments. Now, I really like to recommend to my students, look back through your UC application and ask yourself, what parts of my life have I not been able to share with an admissions counselor, and how can I address that in my personal insight questions? They also offer us context. This is the second time I'm using this word, and it won't be the last, I promise. Sharing those details, those nuances of your home, your school, your community, really help us understand the world that you come from. I cannot tell you enough how important context is in the UC system, because we are not comparing you to anyone else. We don't compare students to other students. We are looking at you within the context of your own environment. Lastly, your PIQs give us depth. They give us details in your application that we cannot find anywhere else. This is where I like to tell my students, now you've got that activities and awards section. Maybe there were a couple of activities that were really, really important to you. Maybe there was a leadership role that you want to talk more about. talk about it in your PIQs as well. It is completely appropriate to take a couple of activities and expand upon them in your personal insight questions, as long as you're not repeating any information. Next slide, please. Now, the UC personal insight questions is, of course, part of the UC application. That's the writing portion. Now, again, you've heard me use this word context quite a bit, and that's because we don't compare students to other students. We're looking at you within your own environment. Context can really be shared in depth in the personal insight questions section of your UC application. So you want to take advantage of this, especially since we're not accepting anything else with your application. That means no interviews, no letters of recommendation, no resumes. We are only using that information in your UC application to evaluate you. Now, you're going to have 8 questions to choose from here. You're going to respond to 4 of them. You cannot respond to more than 4, and it's the same questions and answers for all the UC campuses that you've chosen on the UC application. So again, don't be campus specific in any one of these. All questions will have equal value. There is no advantage to answering one question over another. So we really want you to answer the questions that you have full, complete responses for. Now, we give you options to make it easier for you to relate to them. We understand everybody has different life experiences. So we want to give you the opportunity and the freedom to choose the 4 questions that best fit you personally. You'll have 350 words per response. That means the personal insight questions are not essay questions. This is not a typical English essay. It's a short answer response. Think of these more like an interview on paper. We love I statements, me statements. We really want to learn about you, not other people, because you are the one that's applying to our campus. We're not going to know who you are when reading your application unless you tell us. Next slide, please. So here are the questions themselves, the first 4. Again, they're available online or in the UC application already. Now, I want you to briefly look at the questions here, and then we're going to break them down in just a few slides. You'll see that one of the questions asks about leadership, one about your creative side, one about a talent or skill that you have, and one about taking advantage of an educational opportunity or working to overcome an educational barrier. But what I really want you to do as you look at these questions is this. Think about the experiences you've had in high school. Think about those and how they could be used to answer these questions. Next slide, please. So here are the other 4. As a reminder, you will only answer 4 out of the 8 questions available to you. These last 4 ask about a challenge you faced and steps you've taken to overcome that challenge, an academic subject that inspires you, something you've done to improve your school or your community. And you do have a question that gives you the opportunity to share something that you believe makes you stand out as a strong candidate at the University of California. Now, another thing that I want you to think of, when it comes to the questions you're answering, are you able to give a pretty broad picture of who you are during your 4 years of high school? I want to reiterate that. The answers to these questions should focus on your 4 years of high school. They should be bringing forward who you are today, who you are now. If you're unsure if a question is right for you, maybe once we break it down, you'll have a better idea of what questions really are the right questions for you to answer personally. So let's break them down. Next slide, please. Now, as you read each question, notice that there are really 2 parts to every question. The first part is the question, and the second part is the so what. Why is what you're sharing relevant to you and your application? So in this case, the first part is, go ahead and click that space bar. Describe how you have taken advantage of a significant educational opportunity or overcome an educational barrier that you have faced. But the second part, go ahead and click that part again. Thank you. Is so what? Why is that relevant? Who are you today because of this challenge or opportunity? Now, if you do give examples, they should be recent. And by recent, I mean within high school. And this is true for all of your personal insight question responses. And lastly, you get to define the barrier or the opportunity. So don't get stuck on traditional definitions of those words. Just tell us what you mean. So you really want to bring in 2 answers to each question to give us more context. Now we're going to try it again with the rest of the questions, of course. So moving on to question number 1, next slide, please. We're going to break it down. What's the first thing that we're asking you? Click. If you just want to click a few times, there's a button. You can just, yeah, there you go. I didn't realize that this would be like this. I forgot about this part of the presentation. All right, part 1, in a sentence or 2, can you explain your leadership experience? It did not have to occur in a high school activity. It should be related to your life while you were in high school though. And remember, you get to define what leadership means to you. How did you exemplify leadership, right? Don't get stuck on those traditional definitions. And I'm going to be pretty repetitive here because I really want to drive the points home. Now, the second part, so what? What did you learn from that experience? What happened or what is happening, right? It doesn't have to be something in the past. You're still in high school. It can be something that you're still working on now. Next slide, please. Moving on to question number 2. Every person has a creative side and it can be expressed in many ways. Problem solving, original and innovative thinking, and artistically, to name a few. Describe how you express your creative side. Now let's start breaking it down. What is the first thing that we are asking you? Of course, what is your creative side or your creative talent? Again, you get to set the definition for creativity, not us. So tell us what you mean. Now, what is the second part? So what? What are you doing with your creative side? How do you express that? Again, make sure that those examples come back to who you are now in high school. Now, for this question in particular, I do want to mention that we are not looking for creative writing here. Don't write us a poem. Don't write us a story. Don't write us a haiku. Rather, tell us what you have done that is creative and how you've expressed that side of yourself. Moving on to question number 3. Break it down. Well, we'll first start by reading the question. What would you say is your greatest talent or skill? How have you developed and demonstrated that talent over time? All right, breaking it down. Part 1, what is your talent or skill? Again, you define your talent, you define your skill. And also remember that this talent or skill will not be viewed visually. This is often where we see students try to share links with us, but we don't use links in admissions review. If you include a link in your UC application, I will not click on it. Truthfully, I won't, and we're not allowed to. So don't just take that as me personally. None of us will click on those links. All right. We only review what is included that is written in your UC application. You can't show us the talent or skill, but you can explain it briefly. So part 2, how have you used that talent or skill, right? Why is this relevant? I need you to explain how it's helped you become the person that you are today in high school. I know I'm being repetitive, but trust me, a lot of times we see people talk about things so far in the past that it just leaves me wondering, well, is this who they are now? Or was that something that was significant 5 years ago? And now I'm not really sure who they are today. All right, moving on to question number 5, because the 4th question was the first example. Describe the most significant challenge you have faced and the steps you have taken to overcome this challenge. How has this challenge affected your academic achievement? All right, break it down. What is the first thing that we are asking you? What was the challenge? The challenge does not have to be academic, but it should reflect on you, not others around you. Also remember, focus on who you are now. We don't encourage a challenge that is so far in the past that you're reflecting on your life before high school. You need to be able to share about how it's had an impact on you today. And part 2, so what? How has this challenge affected your academics? How has it affected who you are today? The impacts can be personal, it can be community, it can be school related. But I also want you to think about this. Are you currently working through the challenge, or did you overcome it? If you're still working through it, what steps are you taking and how is it affecting your academics? If you've already worked through it, what did you do? What did you learn? Who are you now because of this? And what did it do to affect your academics? All right, moving on to question number 6. Think about an academic subject that inspires you. Describe how you have furthered this inside and or outside of the classroom. Now, this is a really popular question for students to answer. And if you are choosing to answer this, listen to how we break it down. I don't want you to tell me what biology is, right? If biology is your favorite subject, you don't need to tell me what that is and what it's composed of. So what are we really asking you? Part 1, of course, name your subject. We don't have a preference, but we do want it to be an academic subject. So just think back to those A through G requirements. Those range from history to art, math to language, but more importantly, part 2. Now, if the academic subject was taken at a higher level, did you have success? This is a really great place to highlight dual enrollment work that you sought out, right? Or experiences where you've challenged yourself. Point out any work where you were able to use your academics to influence you in other areas, whether that be your home life, your extracurriculars, things like that. Maybe you really loved biology so much that you decided to work at a college camp in the summers to teach students about biology. Things like that, anything that goes beyond that typical classroom setting is really what we're looking for here. All right, more than halfway done. We only have 2 questions left. Moving on to question 7. What have you done to make your school or your community a better place? What's the first thing we're asking? Of course, what have you done? So actually rewinding a bit, what did you see that needed improvement? What made you want to take action to improve your school or your community? Truthfully, you don't need to go into too much detail here. Remember, we're looking to learn about you, but giving us this bit of background information gives us context to the action that you took. And then as always, you get to define community for us. Lastly, what did you do? What did you learn from this experience? What happened or what is happening? And why is it relevant to who you are today in high school? Moving on to the last question, question number 8. Beyond what has already been shared in your application, what do you believe makes you stand out as a strong candidate for the University of California? Now, we of course want to know what was not asked of you throughout the UC application. This question, truthfully, is not always easy to answer when you haven't started your application. So that's also why we recommend that you go through your UC application in sequential order so you know the information that you've already given us. And now you can focus on your personal insight questions and say, okay, this is really an opportunity for me to share what I think is important about my life. Now, if you do choose to answer this question, we really want to know what more there is to know about you, whether that be academics or personal accomplishments. Now, moving on to the part 2, we all know the answer to this question. So what? Why is this information important? Remember, we don't compare students to one another. We don't need to know what others do. We only care about what's happening in your life with your choices. And of course, it should reflect who you are today in high school. So now that we've gone through all 8 personal insight questions, let's talk about getting started on your responses if you haven't already. So when it comes to getting started on your PIQs or picking your topics, the first thing that I like to tell my students is think about 4 things that are really important to you. This is aside from thinking about those 8 question prompts. Think about 4 things. It could be activities. It could be things that you've accomplished. It could be experiences in your life, a defining moment. Think about 4 things that are really important to you that you would like an application reader to know about you. Then match those 4 topics to a prompt. That way, you know you're answering the prompts that you have full, complete responses for, and that you're talking about things that are truly important to you. After you've thought about those 4 things, hopefully you've matched them through a prompt. Cross out the other responses, whether you don't like them, you don't have anything relevant to say, maybe you don't understand them. And then once you've picked your questions that you want to answer, just start answering them. Don't worry about the word count. Now, remember to keep your answers focused on you. As I mentioned earlier, we love I statements. Think of those PIQs as a written interview. Now, what I really like to do is encourage my students to answer the questions out loud and record yourself. because it's a lot easier to talk about ourselves than to write about ourselves, because we're not used to writing I this, me that, I that, because that's really not what we're taught to do in our English classes in high school. All right, now once you have a draft, go back and edit that draft, but make sure to keep that information that answers the two parts of each question. And of course, it's always a good idea to have a family member, a friend, someone that you trust review your responses to make sure that you didn't leave any gaps or examples out of your answer. And if you didn't get a chance to tell us something important about yourself through the application, this really is the place to do so. Just remember that your examples and responses should reflect who you are today in high school. I almost feel as though at this point, you could all complete my sentences. So that's the goal. Next slide, please. All right, this may be obvious, but your personal insight questions are never read alone. Remember, there are 7 sections in the UC application, and the personal insight questions simply enhance the admissions reader's knowledge and set context for your accomplishments. So once you're finished, ask yourself, do your personal insight questions repeat information that's already shared in other sections of the application? Do they reference information that a stranger would not know? So for example, do you know what the Distinguished Dons Award is? I don't know. I've come across this in the application and I want to be impressed by it, but I personally don't know what that is. So please explain its significance to me if you're talking about something that's niche or unique to you or your environment. And lastly, do your PIQs clearly share your point of view and your opinions? Do they avoid generalizations, right? These are all things to consider, again, to make the most out of your application, because we're not reviewing anything else. Next slide, please. Now, I want to emphasize here that everything included in your application is either viewed as neutral or as positive. Nothing is ever viewed as negative. I promise that. We're always looking for what you're doing well. And with that said, I want to make sure that you are making the most out of your application. So because of that, there are some things that we recommend you try to avoid in your personal insight questions. Number 1, acronyms. We are not going to look it up. You need to spell it out. Spell out the acronym at least once, then you can use it later to save on your word count. Quotations or dialogues, we want to know your thoughts and words, not someone else's. I don't need to know the quote from your favorite artist, politician, author. I want to know your thoughts and words. Quotes and dialogues oftentimes do not add any value to personal insight questions, and they are just going to waste your word count. Philosophy, don't ask questions, just tell us what you mean. If you're starting out your PIQs with what does the world really mean and where do we all come from, you are starting out far too broad for 350 words. I already mentioned creative writing, that's why I kind of skipped over that one. But again, avoid poems, cliches, haikus. We're not English teachers. We are not taught to evaluate English essays or creative writing. So we are going to take everything at face value. Now moving back to titles, there's no need to restate the prompts. It will tell us in your application which question you're answering. Flowery language, keep it specific and use your regular vocabulary. Now, if you're using that SAT word of the day and you don't really know what it means, I'm probably not going to know what it means either. So just make sure that you are using your normal language and that it sounds like you. Storytelling and scene setting. This is by far the one that students fall victim to so often. We do not need to be in the moment with you. I really appreciate you wanting me to be, but I don't need to be. Storytelling and scene setting is how we typically write English essays, but those sensory details are not necessary for a personal insight question. Think about it this way. If you and I were sitting in an interview and I asked you to describe an example of leadership, you're not going to sit there and say, well, I was the team captain and I could feel the sun beating down my back. I could feel the sweat dripping down my face and I could hear the cheering of the crowd. So don't tell me this in your personal insight question. Tell me about what you were doing. Tell me about the role that you played. You want to make sure that you're leaving those sensory details out and not wasting your space. Keep it professional, no slang, abbreviations, or hashtags. While we want your voice to come through, this still is a professional piece of writing. You are applying to a world-class institution. Jokes or sarcasm, inappropriate use of humor is not helpful. And remember, you never know who's reading your PIQ, and they may have a very different sense of humor than you. Now that we know a little bit more about the personal insight questions, let's look at some samples and decide if these responses are good examples or if they're a missed opportunity from the student. All right, PIQ example 1. Describe the most significant challenge you have faced and the steps you have taken to overcome this challenge. How has this challenge affected your academic achievement? So I'm just going to go ahead and read the response. All right. I used to be addicted to pessimism. I thought it was a sign of intelligence. To be an optimist was to be overconfident, blissfully unaware that everything can come crashing down at any second. The logic of pessimism was the opposite of Pascal's wager. If I chose to believe in myself, there was the ominous prospect of severe disappointment. However, if I chose to lose all hope, the worst I could do was meet my expectations. There is also the fact that there are imminent reasons for me to be a pessimist or pessimistic. California is due to be ravaged by a massive earthquake. Humanity is poisoning itself. Nuclear weapons exist. Yet through my teenage years, I learned that too much pessimism is emotionally draining and destructive. It's easy to embrace pessimism, self-doubt, and cynicism when faced with the tiniest bit of uncertainty, like an AP exam, a presentation, or an interview. All too often, my pessimism was hurting my performance. Even if I did succeed, it was at the cost of lots of time spent worrying and stressed. Optimism takes courage. Optimism objectively improves performance. A great communicator has confidence in their skills. A musician has to play with confidence to sound good. Every great three-point shooter is convinced that their next shot will go in, no matter how many they missed before. Pessimism makes you waste energy, stoking fear. To quote Jaggi Vasudev, the Indian yogi, mistaken author, when you are not in fear, just stay like that, because to create fear, you have to use excessive imagination. To not be in fear, you don't have to do anything. There is science behind this. Pessimism increases amygdala activity and stress-producing hormones that inhibit your ability to reason normally. By constantly thinking negative thoughts, you are literally driving yourself insane. So whenever I catch myself droning on about everything I deem wrong with my life, I remember all the things that could easily be worse, all the bad things that didn't happen. I find this exercise helps me feel reassured and focused, and I use it to overcome pessimism. All right, so what are we thinking? Is that a good example or is that a missed opportunity? And a poll has just launched. Let's see what you are all thinking about this response. We'll give it a few seconds to have people give their answers.
It looks like a lot of people are absorbing what you're sharing, Robyn, based on the results so far.
Awesome. And would you mind sharing those when you get the chance?
Yes. We are going to end the poll in 4, 3, 2, 1. Get your responses in, folks. Here we go. Ending and sharing.
Perfect. Oh, thank you so much. And I am so happy to see that the majority of you saw this as a missed opportunity. And that is absolutely true. Remember, everything included in the application is neutral or positive. So this response is essentially seen as neutral. We learned very little, if anything, about this applicant. This applicant also used a lot of cliches. They used quotations, philosophical questions, and philosophy in general, right? When I read this, I think of this more as an English essay. There's no real I statements. Again, I'm not really learning much about this applicant aside from, that they learned pessimism at an early age. There's not really a clear example of a challenge that the applicant faced. So first and foremost, they didn't really even respond to the prompt. So even though it sounds good, remember, you want to be sharing about who you are personally. All right, let's move on to the second PIQ example. So this student answered the question, describe an example of your leadership experience in which you have positively influenced others, helped resolve disputes, or contributed to group efforts over time. What leadership means to me is putting the interest of others ahead of my own. In my family, I look up to my mother the most as she embodies the qualities of an ideal person I want to be. Although uneducated, she is a selfless woman who works 2 jobs while taking care of my disabled father and her 3 children at home. Stemming from a humble background with a younger sibling that I look after, I always put my best self forward to act as a second parent for the family. At home, my leadership role is to take care of my family. Every weekend, helping my mother wheel dirty laundry to the laundromat a mile away and a shopping cart never fails to put a smile on my face. Similarly, even when I have to put in backbreaking effort to do all the chores at home in lieu of my disabled father, it gives me a sense of satisfaction that I am able to contribute to my family. Aside from the supportive role in the household, I am also an advocate for my family. Given my parents' language barrier and ethnicity, our landlord would attempt to take advantage of my family by increasing rent every few months, despite the signed annual lease. I would also take my disabled father to his doctor's appointments and speak on his behalf to the physician. I have many titles and hats I put on, including student, son, sibling, caretaker, peer educator, volunteer. Each one of these represent a part of what it means to be a leader and advocate. Although exhausting at times, I love my work and the positive rippling impacts I have on my family, my friends, and my community. All right, all. What do we think? Is this a missed opportunity or added value to the student's application?
We're going to give folks a couple more seconds to respond. Everybody is rapidly responding. And we're going to close this up in 4, 3, 2, and 1, ending poll and sharing.
Wow, it's almost as if you could all be reading applications with me. You are all correct. This is a great example. The student really shows clear examples and skill sets while also answering the prompt. Now, those first 2 sentences, they're not necessarily talking about themselves, but they only take 2 sentences to set the context, right? Those first sentences really give us more information about why the student acts in the way that they do and how their leadership experience really came to be. There's really not a lot of fluff in this or flowery language in this response. The student really gets straight to the point. And you can see I've included the word count here. It's 290 words. So it's not a very short PIQ, and they didn't take up all the space that was given to them. So I wanted to use this as an example that a PIQ can really be concise, but still give the application reader a lot of context, especially when you get straight to the point. So yes, great example. All right, moving on to our third and final example. The question the student answered was, describe an example of your leadership experience in which you have positively influenced others, helped resolve disputes, or contributed to group efforts over time. Growing up, most of my endeavors were largely independent, from piano, cello, and violin to math and usako, but I wanted to break out of that mold. I desired a community where I could share my passion with friends. So when I joined teams, I was most excited to become a part of a family of similarly minded peers. Having had a lot of experience identifying my own strengths and weaknesses, I was able to detect the skills and areas of improvement of others. I naturally stepped into the role of delegating math problems to members and facilitating teamwork by having people cross-checking each other's work. I helped problem solve when groups were stuck, even finding errors in the solution packets from previous years. To help the team come up with creative engineering ideas, I read articles related to that year's theme and shared them with my team during meetings as topics of discussion. Through these team building exercises and regular practice sessions, I was able to lead our team to win first place in the math contest and the title of Best in Nation in the overall teams contest. But when I look back, I don't think about our medal or awards we won. I think about the time we solved the escape room in 51 minutes and 52 seconds, the trip to the aquarium, and the inside jokes, all which strengthened our bond. Because of my team's family, I have become more confident with my leadership skills and have since taken on more roles. In programming club, I became a problem writer or an educator, leading the creation of problem sets and checking that each test case was valid for our student-run competition. Through our combined efforts, we were able to successfully host the first competition of the year, the Girls Programming League. It was through these opportunities that I learned not only to collaborate, but also to lead others toward a common goal. And one of my main priorities as a leader is to build a strong community, which I will continue to commit to in college. All right. What do we think for our last example? Is this a missed opportunity or added value to the student's application?
Responses are coming in hot. started out a little bit more neck and neck, but we're seeing a lead. I'm going to close up the poll in 4, 3, 2, get your votes in, 1. Thank you for your participation in This Matters, sharing results. There you go.
All right, so this is a little bit closer, and this was my goal with this question, was to kind of try to trick you all, but the majority of you are correct. This is a good example of a personal insight question, and thank you for going to the next slide. So overall, the student really does give details of what they did, what skills they possess, and what they improved upon, especially in the bolded areas of this PIQ. So you'll see I've made some edits to this response. But I did also want to highlight in red some things that I felt were kind of a missed opportunity. First and foremost, what is USACO? What is Teams? When something is all capitalized, I assume that it's an acronym. And I have no idea what those things are. I more so understand Teams because they elaborated on it a bit more, but still remember, I'm reading hundreds, in this year, thousands of applications, right? So you do want to be as clear as possible because you don't know who's reading your PIQ. And you might be wondering, why did Robyn highlight that second to last paragraph in red? So really, when you're answering your PIQs and you're giving examples, you want to stick to one topic. And the reason being, this is kind of an acronym that I've started to use, or not an acronym, this is a metaphor, I suppose, that I've started to use is think about acquaintances versus friends, right? You can have maybe 10 acquaintances that you don't really know very well, and then have your 2 best friends. What's more important to you, right? Pick one thing and give us more details so that I can learn more about you. Remember those 3 things that I talked about that the PIQs really do. One of those things is depth. So if you're bouncing around to a bunch of different examples, I'm not truly going to learn about this one area of your life in depth. I'm only going to scratch the surface of a multitude of things. So I hope that makes sense. That's why I highlighted the second to last paragraph in red, because it doesn't relate to the other things that they're talking about in their response. I'd rather them just stick to that one leadership experience that they talked about and expand upon it. All right, those are our 3 examples, and we'll move on to the next slide, which is talking about the additional comment section of the UC application. Now, for those of you that have already started working on your application, I applaud you, and I think that that is such a great thing for you to start working on already. You may have noticed this additional comment section and thought to yourself, well, is it really optional or is it not? It's optional, I promise. But you'll find this is one of the last things you'll fill out. And it's really a space that you can tell us anything that you want us to know about you. It can explain a deficiency. It can explain a gap in your application. It can be academic. It can be non-academic. It is not an opportunity for you to continue your personal insight question responses. Now, as I just mentioned, this section is completely optional to fill out. So please don't write something like, thanks for your time. I look forward to hearing back from you. Because let's be honest, I know you look forward to hearing back from me. You want to know if you got in or not, right? Now, we do have some examples for you here to see what might be a good thing to include in the additional comment section, if anything. I was limited to only 2 AP courses per year at my high school. Now, we want to see that you're challenging yourself in your coursework, but we're not going to penalize you, especially if you didn't have it available to you. And while this is an academic example, think about non-academic examples as well. You know, for example, that second personal insight question. Well, I was really interested in joining this club or this sport at school, but I wasn't able to because I had to come home and take care of my younger siblings. Anything like that to give us more context to your situation is super helpful. Due to the pandemic, my high school moved to a 4x4 schedule. We took 4 classes a semester, but earned a year's worth of credit. Now, things also like this are important to share because it's not really the norm. So give us that context or information behind things that may have changed due to the pandemic or otherwise. I didn't have Wi-Fi at home for spring 2020. Remote instruction required me to go to the Starbucks parking lot for school. Again, anything that can give us more context to your life, your experience in high school should be included in your application somewhere. And that might just be the additional comment section. Now, one last thing that I want to say, I alluded to this a bit earlier, is please do not add any external links. So if you have a YouTube video, tell us about it. Don't show us. We will not go outside of the application to look at any sort of links in any part of the application. Next slide, please. Oh, here we go. Okay, so I will leave you with some fantastic resources that we have. Number one, our YouTube channel, UCSB for Me. As you can see, it's the number 4. Has a full UC application tutorial playlist that goes in depth in each section of the UC application, logistics, FAQs, things like that. We also have a playlist with videos dedicated to helping you with the UC application. You'll find our UC application for undocumented students video, how to calculate the UC GPA, how to include dual enrollment or college level courses, things like that. We are constantly updating our channel and our videos, so I recommend that you check back frequently. And of course, you can find the personal insight questions and the personal insight question guide for freshman applicants on the University of California website. You can just search UC PIQ in your web browser. Next slide, please. And if you have any additional questions for us that I didn't answer today, you might be wondering, well, who is Leslie Escobedo? And she is actually your admissions counselor. She was preoccupied tonight with another college fair, which is why I am here representing in her place. But she is fantastic and so happy to assist you with the UC application, the personal insight questions, or any questions you have about UC Santa Barbara. That's why her contact information is there. You can always, of course, reach out to me, which I'll share my information in the chat box as well. But more importantly, you can follow us on social media. We have our Instagram accounts here on the screen, UCSB Life. This is an account that's run by students for students to really give you an inside look of what student life is actually like at UCSB. And we have our UCSB admissions Instagram, which is pretty typical admissions announcements, updates, fun facts, tips, things like that. But that said, that's all we have for you today. So I'm going to pass it back to Miss Lynn.
Thank you, Robyn. I'm going to passing this over to Miss Cabrera.
Well, thank you, Robyn. That was so insightful, so much wonderful and useful information. Thank you all who's joining us tonight for sticking around. We are still making good time, so we'll have plenty of time to answer all your questions. But before we get to the Q&A, I want to talk a little bit more about what we have coming up from our CUSD-Futureology team. So if you're looking at the screen, we have a UC-CSU webinar coming up next Wednesday. We are going to cover information about the differences between these two wonderful California university systems and just background information about them. And so please join us for that. And then our big event in October is going to be our annual virtual college fair. That's going to be a week's worth of wonderful events that we have planned out. We have college showcases based on US regions, based on specific programs. We also have breakout sessions based on topics. So we're going to cover a lot of different things, including financial aid, testing, which is the big question. So please join us for that during our college fair. And then this is exclusively for our families from CUSD. So please join us for that. We have some great things planned for that week. And then finally, for seniors, we have our college app and college essay support sessions. Those are going to start on October 26th on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And that's going to be an opportunity for all of you to receive support with completing your college application, like your UC, your CSU, your Common App. And then also we also give you an opportunity to get feedback on those essays. So your PIQs, that's something that we can look at. Something that I think that Bea mentioned really briefly at the beginning is that all of us are UC admissions readers. So we've all read for UC admissions. So we're very much familiar with the PIQs as well. And so check us out, register on our website. The link is on the screen, but then you can also scan that QR code to go to our website and register for those. moving on to the next slide, just wrapping it up, we would love for all of you, if possible, to give us some feedback on what you thought of this event, so that we can improve future events. We want to continue to offer so many opportunities for you to learn more, to receive more support. But we want to get your feedback as well as how we did tonight. So please complete that. We'll put the link in the chat as well so that you can, if you can't scan it, you can also follow the link. So I'll put that in the chat. Let me do that now. And then if we move on to finally, just thank you all for joining us tonight. We're gonna jump into the Q&A. I see those are jumping already. So thank you, you're all on it. So with that, please, thank you all. Thank you, Robyn. We're going to jump into the questions. Please follow us on social media. We have our email. There's Leslie's lovely picture and her email. So please, if you need support from her, go ahead and email her. So with that, let's jump into the Q&A.
Right, here we go. And once again, thank you, Robyn, so much for that super jam-packed and concise presentation. Thank you. Let's see. Zara has a question. If we have questions during filling out the application, is there a phone number or email to contact? How soon will they get back to us?
Yes, there is a contact email and or phone number. So to be totally honest, I would say this, depending on what your question is, will probably depend on who you reach out to. If it's a question about, I have this activity or I have something that I participated in, what's the best place for me to input it in the application? So it's not necessarily a logistical question. I would say reach out to one of us admissions counselors, Leslie, myself, things like that. If it's a logistical question, I'm trying to input this summer course and it's not allowing me to for whatever reason, that's when you'll reach out to the UC Application Help Center. I am including a link in the chat box just now. You can see that they have an email address, they have a phone number. If you do call them, you'll need to call them during normal business hours Pacific time. I don't have their response time. I'm unsure, but I wouldn't imagine that it's any more than 48 hours. And for us, it's no more than 48 hours at the very most.
Awesome. Another follow-up question is, what does neutral rating mean? So no negative rating? I think, so Robyn had mentioned this earlier when looking at, PIQs that added value versus PIQs that were missed opportunities, right? And I would say that just in my experience as an admissions reader is that readers are not looking for reasons to deny you. They're not hunting for reasons to reject you from their school. And so nothing will give negative value to your application. It's either neutral or it's a bonus, it's a plus, right? And so it's either kind of a missed opportunity where it's kind of neutral, kind of, no added value or benefit, or it's going to be great. But there's nothing that you would do necessarily that would ding you or penalize you. And if anybody wants to add to that, please feel free to.
And Robyn, we did get a question early on during this webinar about how do you, as an admissions application reviewer, keep your attention through all those applications? What helps you stay even and balanced from reading the first application through the last one? You might read maybe hundreds later. I heard you say thousands. So if you could please give us your insight on that.
Sure. So I mean, I think it probably differs from person to person. And I mean, we have external readers who choose to do it. And then there are those of us who it's our job and we have to read. For myself personally, I listen to smooth jazz in the background. I almost feel embarrassed to admit, but that just, it makes me stay calm. And it also kind of just helps me feel not rushed. I don't know if that's enough of an answer for you, but truthfully, I'm normally sitting on my couch and we're reading applications in the winter. I mean, it's winter in Santa Barbara, so it's not very cold, but my apartment gets a little chilly. So I'll usually be sitting in a blanket and I have my hot tea and I'm listening to my jazz and I'm just slowly going through each application. And before you know it, you read 80 applications in a day and you're like, wow, I feel accomplished. I'm going to close my computer and I'll wake up tomorrow and do it again. So that's how I go about it. I'm sure almost every application reader would have a different response to it, but that's me personally. Yeah, and I mean it's really helpful because it's not like it's not the only thing, you're looking at the application in its entirety, right? So you're not just reading personal insight questions over and over again. So you finish an application and then you start from A to Z and you just reset as this is a new person. Now I'm looking at what school they attended, what courses they took, what activities they participated in. Now I'm going to read about them, or whatever order it is that you choose to go through that application. It's a process, and maybe you want to switch it up. Maybe you're an application reader that's like, all right, this time I started with academics and I'm going to PIQs, and now maybe this next time I'm going to start with PIQs and go to academics, right? So there's a lot of different things that you can do to, I guess, make it the best experience for you that it can be. But I think also like having experience with reading applications before, this past year definitely was not my first year reading. So just knowing, what it's going to be like, I'm mentally prepared for the fact that this is going to be my majority of my days for the next 2 months, is helpful.
Yeah, I definitely read in batches to keep my mind fresh. So you're not going to sit there and go through like 100 applications, or I wouldn't, like tiny batches just to keep yourself alert. And keep in mind that most of the people who are reading these applications, have worked in education, have worked with students in some capacity, and they tend to like students, and that's why they're doing this. So I loved it. I found it as an opportunity to get to know a new person over and over and over again. That's part of why I love my job. So it's fun for readers. After like your 300th application, it's, fun. But it's definitely a way for us to get to know new people. And I think every admissions reader finds a way to make it work for them and to make it an equitable process for sure.
Yeah. And I want to agree with that, because yes, as a reader and as an educator, like I do care about my students, and I've read applications for UC Irvine before, and the way I think about each application, I think about that student. I'm like, they spent hours working on those essays, they spent hours on those activities that they included on their application. So I just want to give them the time and dignity and to review it with just as if I was reading it for the first application for each application. So it might sound corny, but that's how I kind of navigate reading hundreds of applications.
Awesome questions, everybody, and thank you to Kristen in the Q&A, just cranking out those answers for all of you. You are fast. So there's a question: if how much do the PIQs weigh in the acceptance process, in the admissions process?
Sure. So a link that I'm going to include for you all, and I spoke about this earlier, there was a slide on these, are the 13 factors for admission that the UCs can use when evaluating application. Now, we all use the same 13 factors, but the value that we place on these factors differs from campus to campus. So in this sense, I'm only going to talk about UCSB's selection process. I know a lot of the UCs do also use a holistic approach, and I'm only going to be talking about UCSB. So as I just mentioned, we use a holistic approach or review when reviewing applications. So it's not that one section of the application has a certain weight or weighs more than another part of the application. It is impossible to say whether we think a student will be admitted or not based on one section of the application, because they all play off of each other. So as this whole presentation was based on, those personal insight questions really give us context or background information to who you are, not just as a student, but as a person overall. So thus giving more information to us about any other information that you shared in the application. If again, you're sharing with me that you were not able to participate in any other activities outside of school because you had to go home to make dinner for a disabled parent or whatever it may be, that is going to tell me more information about why you didn't participate in something. Or let's say you struggled with mental health or physical health or whatever it may be, and that's the reason why you didn't perform well in a few of your courses during your sophomore year. Anything like that, right? It's all just giving us context so that we can learn more about you as a person overall. Does that answer the question? And feel free to chime in, any of you application readers as well. I know you've all been there.
I think you said it perfectly.
Agreed.
Any other questions, friends? We have some time, but obviously if you don't have any questions, you're welcome to log out and enjoy the rest of your evening. But we can definitely hang back to answer some more. So let's see what we've got. Okay. Oh, somebody wants to know a specific question for UCSB, which is how many applications does UCSB normally get? How about this year?
So the number of applications that we get, or am I on mute? Okay, no. The number of applications that we get, of course, varies year to year. This year, so I'll start last year, I believe, if my memory isn't mistaking me, we had about 95,000 applications. And this year it increased to over 100,000 applications. So I think that was a fairly common thing across the UC campuses. And we, of course, don't know exactly why. There are a lot of things that changed. COVID, for one, the not us requiring SAT or ACT was also something that was really big that changed. So I'd say for UC Santa Barbara, anywhere between 90 to 100,000 applications per year for freshman applicants is pretty common. And for a transfer, normally between 19 to 20,000 is pretty common for transfers at UCSB.
Awesome, thank you. So we have two questions that are kind of related, and because you're in admissions, you might be able to answer this. At what point in the application review process is a selection made for admission? We know that, readers review applications. What happens after that?
Right. So every application is read at least twice. Most applications are read 3 times. And to be totally honest, the role that I play as, an admissions counselor, now assistant director, that's as far as it goes for me. I read an application, I determine, whatever I think about that application without, to be honest, giving too many details that I'm not really permitted to share. But after that, a selection is made based on that holistic review. What that process exactly looks like, I wish I could share more, and that's all she wrote. I would say if you, yeah, there you go.
Just know that your applications are definitely being reviewed, by trained readers who are trained to evaluate applications in the same way, right, through the same lens. And so there's definitely, an equitable process going on in that review process, and that, more than a set of eyes are looking at those applications for sure. Here's a question for the UCs in general, right? Do the majors you select on your application ever affect whether or not you can be admitted? If a major is very competitive, can it keep you from attending the school?
Really good question. Yes and no. So again, this is a question that you should be asking to every UC campus that you're interested in applying to ask what your major means for selection at that campus. So for example, at UC Santa Barbara, we have a 3-college system. College of Letters and Science, College of Engineering, and our College of Creative Studies. In our College of Letters and Science, we do not admit by major. So regardless of what major you include in the College of Letters and Science on your application, that's not going to have an impact on the review of your application. In our College of Engineering, totally different ballgame. We do admit by major in engineering. The College of Engineering is highly competitive, and we're admitting students directly to those majors. So that's why students that are interested in engineering at UCSB, we recommend that you include engineering as your primary major. And as your alternate major, choose something in the College of Letters and Science, because if you're not quite competitive for engineering, you'll be reconsidered for your major in the College of Letters and Science. So yes, your major may or may not have an impact on your admissions decision, and that will vary campus to campus, college to college.
Okay, we're getting into some more admission specific questions, right? So not so much PIQ at this point, but given that we come from public schools, yet live in fairly well-off areas, how much do our high school and place of residence hurt or help our overall chances? I noticed that school and place of residence was one of the factors considered for admission.
Yeah, so I'd say that the basis of this question comes back to context, right? So again, for UCSB, we are looking holistically. So we want to understand what opportunities were provided to you and how did you take advantage of those opportunities. So if you did come from a school where maybe you weren't offered so many opportunities, we're not going to penalize you for that. Or if you were presented a ton of opportunities and you chose not to participate, right? That also gives us some context or some information about who you are as a student, as a person, whatever that may be. And I'd say, yeah, that's the biggest part of that. There's, of course, the eligibility in the local context or the statewide guarantee, which, to be totally honest, the best way to learn about eligibility in local context is through a link that I'm sharing with you in the chat box, mostly because it's kind of getting into nitty-gritty of things, but essentially, you know, if your school participates in ELC or eligibility in the local context, you can see as a California resident, if you are ranked in the top 9% of students in the California high school class, and you can see this after you submit your application, you can log back in, see if you're ELC. If you are in the top 9%, you are guaranteed admission to the UC. This has definitely changed over the years. It used to be that you could be guaranteed to one of a certain number of campuses, and now it's just to the UC system. Really what that looks like now is if you are ELC, you're guaranteed admission to Merced. They just happen to be the campus that has the space to allow ELC. But definitely read more about that if you're more interested with that link that I just sent in the chat.
Thank you, Robyn. And we just had somebody mention in the Q&A that they're really thankful for this presentation and that it gave them a lot of insight into the PIQs. So thank you for that, and definitely thank you for your time. Everybody, we're going to be wrapping up in a little bit. So if you have some last burning questions about the PIQs, about, you know, UC admissions, this is the time to ask. Somebody had asked earlier, like, is it advisable to apply to every single UC campus? Is that like good or bad, right? And as a counselor, I can tell you that it should come down to fit, right? And you as an individual. I think you should not lose sight of the fact that in looking for colleges, you first need to think about what you want out of a college, right? If all 9 UC undergraduate campuses fit all of your fit factors, cool, go ahead and apply to all 9 of them. But you really should be thinking about your academic fit factors, majors, programs of study that you want to pursue. What does that school have to offer? What does that UC campus have to offer that aligns with your academic academic needs? Socially, is it in the location that you want to be in? Is the size aligned with what you want, right? Are the clubs and organizations aligned with what you're looking for? And financially, does it make sense? You know, UC has a set tuition, but it will vary just a tiny bit. You know, cost of housing, meal plans, those things will vary by campus. So you need to look at that as well to make that determination as to whether you should be applying to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 9 UCs. Okay, so there's not a blanket statement for that. It really comes down to what you want out of the school. So somebody asked if you should highlight ELC in your essay. You don't have to. Readers will know if you are ELC on your college application. So no need to. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It looks like we are wrapping up. Robyn, thank you once again for the amazing information and for your time this evening. We know how busy all of you are, so we really appreciate your presence tonight and your knowledge. And for all the families, students, parents here, thank you so much for joining us. We will be posting this on YouTube probably by tomorrow because we try to get it done quickly. So check out our YouTube channel by tomorrow night, and it should be up there. And we'll also send you a follow-up email with the slides as well. Thank you so much to everybody. Good luck to all of you. If you are seniors applying, we are rooting for you, and we will be here to support you if you need us. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Good evening, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Okay, folks, I'm going to go ahead and close out this webinar. You all have a wonderful night and good luck to you.